The bridge of the vigilance of Own was quiet in the way that deep space always made things quiet. Not silent. There was always the hum of engines, the soft beeping of sensor consoles, the occasional click of an officer's claws against a control panel, but quiet in the way that reminded everyone aboard that they were very small, and the universe was very, very large. Fleet Commander Sethari Voss stood at the center of it all, his crystalline carapace catching the pale blue light of the tactical display. He was tall, even by Cathari standards, and his body was covered in the hard, glass-like plates that made his species look like living sculptures carved from ice. He had served the Confederacy for 43 years. He had commanded fleets through border skirmishes, pirate hunts, and 2 full-scale wars. He was not a creature who frightened easily. Today was supposed to be simple. Escort the Molvari ambassador to the neutral station. Attend the peace summit with the Vraxi Dominion. Make sure nobody shot anybody before the diplomats could finish talking. Simple. Fleet Commander, said a small voice from the sensor station. I am picking up something strange. Voss turned his head. The voice belonged to sensor analyst Nuri, a young officer on her very first deep space rotation. She was small, her carapace still carrying the pale green tint of youth, and she had a habit of second-guessing herself that Voss found both annoying and endearing. Define strange, Voss said. Nuri's 4 hands moved across her console. A hyperspace signature, sir. It appeared at the edge of our detection range about 90 seconds ago. It is large. Vraxi? No, sir, it does not match any Vraxi drive profile, or Cathari, or Molvari. She paused. Her hands stopped moving. Sir, it does not match anything in our database. Voss felt a small, cold feeling in his chest. Unknown signatures in the Dralvin corridor were never good news. The corridor was a lawless stretch of space between 3 empires, and the things that lived in lawless places were usually things that preferred not to be identified. He walked to Nuri's station and looked over her shoulder at the readings. She was right. The signature was enormous, far larger than any warship the Confederacy operated, and it was clean, precise, and completely unfamiliar. Ambassador Tovik, Voss said without turning around, you may wish to see this. Ambassador Drell Tovik floated forward from the observation area. The Molvari were a gelatinous species, soft and bioluminescent, and Tovik moved through the air like a slow, glowing cloud. He had been assigned to this mission as a representative of the Molvari people for the Peace Summit, and he had spent most of the journey quietly worrying about everything that could go wrong. What is it? Tovik asked, his body flickering with nervous light. We do not know, Voss said, yet. The signature grew stronger. Whatever it was getting closer. The bridge crew exchanged glances. A few of the younger officers shifted uncomfortably at their stations. Then, Nuri made a sound that Voss had never heard a Cathari make before. A thin, high sound, like glass cracking under pressure. He looked at her and saw that her carapace had gone almost white. Nuri, report. The signature has resolved, sir. It is a single vessel. It has just dropped out of hyperspace at the far edge of the corridor. Her voice was barely a whisper. It is very, very big. The main display shifted to show the new contact. Every officer on the bridge looked up. The ship was a monster. That was the only word for it. It hung in space like a dark cathedral, angular and massive, its hull covered in armor plating so thick that it looked more like a fortress than a vessel. It dwarfed the vigilance of Own. It dwarfed anything Voss had ever seen. It sat motionless against the stars, and it radiated something that Voss could not name, but could absolutely feel. A sense of purpose so heavy, it was almost physical. Then the warnings began. Every console on the bridge lit up at once. Alarms screamed. Red lights flashed across every display, painting the bridge in the color of blood. But these were not standard combat warnings. These were something else, something old. Automated alerts dragged from the deepest archives of the Confederacy's intelligence network. Alerts that most officers had never seen triggered in their entire careers. The words appeared on every screen simultaneously. Priority Alpha, species designation, human, vessel class, warship, all Confederacy assets, prepare for the unthinkable. The bridge went completely still. Voss read the words 3 times. Then he read them again. Humans, he said quietly. The word felt strange in his mouth. He had heard it before, of course. Everyone had heard it before. Late at night, in the barracks, when the cadets told stories to frighten each other. A species from a death world, a planet so hostile that the very act of surviving childhood was considered a military achievement. A species that did not just adapt to violence, but embraced it, refined it, turned it into something beautiful and terrible in equal measure. A species that the Confederacy had supposedly encountered once, long ago, and had decided to never ever speak about again. Ghost stories. Campfire tales for nervous recruits. That was what Voss had always believed. But ghost stories did not drop out of hyperspace in ships the size of small moons. What do we know about them? Voss asked. His voice was steady. He was proud of that. His intelligence officer, a grizzled veteran named Sorath, worked his console with shaking hands. Almost nothing, sir. The files are heavily classified. Most of what exists in the general database is fragments, rumors. He looked up. Sir, I cannot access the primary intelligence files on this species. My clearance is insufficient. You are the senior intelligence officer of a Confederacy battle fleet. Yes, sir, and my clearance is still insufficient. Voss let that sink in. Whatever the Confederacy knew about humans, it had decided that even fleet-level intelligence officers should not be allowed to know it. That told him more than any file ever could. He looked back at the main display. The human warship sat at the edge of the corridor like a predator watching from the tree line. It did not hail them. It did not move. It simply existed, enormous and silent, and waited. Ambassador Tovik had gone completely dark. Every trace of bioluminescence had faded from his body, which for a Malvari was the equivalent of going pale with terror. Fleet Commander, Tovik whispered, what are we going to do? Voss stared at the impossible ship on his screen. 43 years of service, 2 wars, 100 battles. And he had never once felt what he felt now. The deep, certain knowledge that he was looking at something that existed on a level so far above his own that the very concept of fighting it was meaningless. He straightened his carapace and turned to his crew. All ships to battle stations, he said, and get me someone with the clearance to open those files. I want to know exactly what is sitting in my corridor. The bridge erupted into motion. Officers shouted orders. Alarms continued to wail. And at the edge of the Dralvan corridor, silent and still and patient, the human warship waited. It had nowhere else to be. It had all the time in the world. The face that appeared on the HoloLink was old. Not just aged, worn, like stone that had been battered by wind and rain for centuries, until the sharp edges were gone, and only the tired, smooth truth remained. Archivist Palin looked like a Cathari who had spent his entire life carrying a weight that no one else could see, and the effort had ground him down to something thin and fragile and deeply, deeply tired. He was one of 7 individuals in the entire Confederacy cleared to access the Terran files. When Voss had finally reached someone at high command with enough authority to act, they had woken Palin from sleep, briefed him, and connected him to the vigilance of On within 20 minutes. The speed of it frightened Voss almost as much as the ship outside. You are certain it is human, Palin said. It was not a question. The automated identification system flagged it before we even knew what we were looking at. The ship's transponder identifies it as the UNS Achilles. It has not moved or communicated since its arrival. Palin closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, the light in them had changed. He looked like a man who had been waiting decades for bad news, and had finally received it. Fleet Commander Voss, Ambassador Tovik, what I am about to tell you is classified at the highest level of the Confederacy. It has been hidden from the public, from military commanders, and from diplomatic channels for 200 years. There is a reason for this. Once you understand what happened, you will understand the reason. He took a breath. 200 years ago, a Confederacy exploration fleet discovered a small convoy of ships in what we now call the Outer Reaches. These ships were primitive by our standards. Slow drives, thin hulls, basic weapons. The convoy carried approximately 40,000 individuals, families, mostly men, women, and children. They were colonists, looking for a world to settle. They belonged to a species we had never encountered before. Humans, Tovik said softly. Humans, Palin confirmed. The Confederacy at that time operated under the expansion doctrine. Any species encountered that lacked the military strength to resist was to be absorbed into the Confederacy as a client race, a servant species. The humans were scanned, evaluated, and deemed weak. The fleet commander gave the order to subjugate them. Voss felt something cold settle in his stomach. He knew the expansion doctrine. It had been abolished 80 years ago, but its legacy still stained the Confederacy's history like blood on white stone. The humans refused, Palin continued. They were given a simple choice, submit or be destroyed. They chose a third option. They fought. 40,000 colonists in unarmed transports, and they fought a Confederacy war fleet. They used mining equipment as weapons. They rammed their cargo ships into our cruisers. Women and children loaded explosive cancers into airlocks and launched them by hand. He paused. His voice had become very quiet. They lost. Of course they lost. They had no warships, no military training, and no chance of survival. The Confederacy fleet destroyed the convoy completely. All 40,000 colonists were killed, including approximately 9,000 children. The bridge was absolutely silent. Nuri had pressed her hands flat against her console, as if she needed something solid to hold on to. For 10 years, nothing happened, Palin said. The Confederacy recorded the incident and moved on. The humans were classified as an extinct minor species. The file was closed. And then, exactly 30 years after the colony was destroyed, a fleet appeared at the edge of Confederacy space. He brought up an image on the HoloLink. Even as a recording 2 centuries old, the sight of it made Voss take an involuntary step backward. Warships, hundreds of them, each one built like the thing sitting outside his corridor right now. Massive, armored, and radiating a kind of cold fury that seemed to bleed through the image itself. They did not announce themselves. They did not negotiate. They did not explain. In 1 week they burned through 3 of our border systems. They destroyed every military installation, every shipyard, every weapons platform, and every piece of infrastructure that could be used to wage war. They were precise. They were methodical. They were completely, utterly without mercy toward anything that carried a weapon. Palin's voice cracked slightly. But they did not touch a single civilian, not one. They destroyed our ability to make war, and they did not harm a single person who was not holding a gun. Our own records confirm this. In 3 systems, across 7 days of continuous combat, the human fleet killed only military personnel who actively fought back. Everyone else was left completely unharmed. Voss tried to process this. A species that could wage war with that kind of power and that kind of precision, and chose to exercise both simultaneously. It was almost impossible to understand. When they were finished, Palin said, They sent a single message to Confederacy High Command. It said, "Now you know what we are. Next time, we will finish it." Then they left. No occupation, no demands, no territory claimed. They simply left. And the Confederacy? Tavik asked. The Confederacy panicked. Within 6 months, the expansion doctrine was quietly suspended. Within a year, a secret non-aggression pact was signed with the human government through back channels. Every record of the encounter was classified at the highest level and erased from public archives. The official position of the Confederacy became that humanity did not exist. "You hid from them," Voss said. There was no judgment in his voice. He understood completely. "We hid from them," Palin agreed, "for 200 years. And in that time, we heard rumors. All the spacefaring species hear rumors about the humans eventually. That they come from a world where everything is trying to kill them. That they form emotional bonds so powerful they will die for complete strangers. That they carry their anger for generations, but can forgive in a heartbeat if they believe the change is real." He looked directly at Voss through the HoloLink. "Fleet Commander, if the UNS Achilles is in your corridor, it is not there by accident. Human warships do not wander. They are sent. Someone, somewhere, has attracted the attention of the United Nations Navy. I strongly suggest you find out why, before someone does something foolish." The HoloLink disconnected. Voss stood in silence for a long time. Then Nuri's console chimed. "Sir," she said, her voice barely holding steady. "The human ship is transmitting, unencrypted, open channel." The message appeared on the main display, simple and clear. "We know about the summit. We know about the Vraxi raids on Molvari colony Tesrin 4. We are here to observe. Do not interfere with us, and we will not interfere with you." Voss read it twice. Tesrin 4. A minor Molvari farming colony on the outer edge of Molvari space. The Vraxi had raided it 6 months ago. 12,000 civilians killed. It had barely made the news on the major networks. Most people in the Confederacy had never even heard of it. But the humans had heard of it, and they had sent a warship. Tovik floated closer to Voss, his body flickering with confused, frightened light. "Why?" he whispered. "Tesrin 4 was one of our smallest colonies. We have no treaty with the humans. We have never even spoken to them. Why would they come for Tesrin 4? Voss did not have an answer. Before he could speak, Nuri's console screamed again, a different alarm this time. Hyperspace contacts. Many of them. Too many. "Sir," Nuri said, and this time her voice was not frightened. It was hollow. "The Vraxi Dominion fleet has arrived. 312 warships." She looked up from her console. "Sir, they are armed far beyond what was agreed for the summit. This is not a negotiation fleet." On the main display, 300 Vraxi warships spread across the corridor like a wall of teeth and fire. And beyond them, alone and unmoved, the Achilles waited still. Warlord Kreth Damagar was not a complicated creature. He was large, scaled, and covered in scars that he wore like medals. He had risen through the ranks of the Vraxi Dominion by being smarter than the enemies in front of him and more brutal than the allies behind him. He believed in strength the way other species believed in gods, absolutely and without question. The strong took, the weak gave. The universe was simple if you understood this one truth. He stood on the bridge of the Fang of Raxus, his flagship, and looked out at the 42 Cathari ships floating in the corridor like insects waiting to be stepped on. 312 warships under his command. This was not a negotiation fleet. This was never meant to be a negotiation fleet. The peace summit was a trap, and the trap was now sprung. He opened a broadcast channel to the entire corridor. "Kithari Fleet, Molvari Delegation, this is Warlord Kreth Damagar of the Vraxi Dominion. The time for talking is over. You will power down your weapons and surrender your ships immediately. The Drelvan Corridor and all territories beyond it now belong to the Dominion. Resist, and you will be destroyed. You have 5 minutes to comply. On the bridge of the Vigilance of Own, Fleet Commander Voss closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds. When he opened them, his face was calm and his voice was steady. All ships, defensive formation. Protect the ambassador's vessel. We will hold as long as we can. It was not bravery, exactly. It was duty. 42 ships against 300 was not a battle, it was a delay. But a delay was all he could offer, and he would offer it without hesitation. Ambassador Tovik was trembling, his entire body flickering between colors that had no name in any language Voss knew. Fleet Commander, we cannot survive this. No, Voss agreed simply. We cannot. And then a new voice entered the corridor. It came through on an open channel, broadcast to every ship, Cathari, Molvari, and Vraxi alike. It was a woman's voice, and it was the calmest sound any of them had ever heard. Warm and steady, like someone speaking to a friend over a quiet meal. There was no anger in it, no fear, no urgency. Just a perfect, unshakable stillness that made the vast emptiness of space feel suddenly very small. Warlord Damagar, this is Captain Ilara Ven of the United Nations Navy warship, Achilles. I would like a moment of your time. Every bridge in the corridor went silent. Damagar's eyes narrowed. He had noticed the unknown ship at the edge of his sensor range when he arrived. His tactical officers had flagged it as an anomaly, a single vessel, very large, of unknown origin. One ship was one ship, no matter how big it was. Unknown vessel, Damagar said, his voice thick with contempt. This is not your affair. Leave this corridor or be destroyed along with the rest. I understand your position, Ven replied. Her tone did not change. Before you commit to it, I would like to share some information with you. I think you will find it relevant. She began speaking. She spoke about Tesren 4. She named the Vraxi assault units that had been deployed to the colony. She named the commanding officers who had given the orders. She described the attack in detail, the orbital bombardment that had destroyed the colony's power grid, the ground troops that had moved through the agricultural districts, the systematic killing of civilians who had no weapons and no way to escape. She was precise. She gave dates, unit numbers, casualty figures, and names. Names of Vraxi officers, names of Molvari dead. She spoke for 3 full minutes, and she did not raise her voice once. When she finished, the corridor was so quiet that Nuri could hear her own heartbeat inside her carapace. Then Ven spoke again. The people of Tesren 4 had no warships, no weapons, no military of any kind. They were farmers, teachers, children. You burned them because you could. That was the only reason. And that warlord is the reason I am here. Damagar's claws tightened on the railing of his bridge. You dare lecture me? You are one ship. I have 300. Whatever you think you know about Tesren 4, it does not change the reality of what sits in front of you. I agree, Ven said. Reality is important, so let me offer you some. You have 1 hour to surrender the officers responsible for the Tesren 4 massacre and withdraw your fleet from this corridor. If you do not, I will show you what happens when you attract the attention of a species that considers the defense of the helpless to be a sacred duty. Damagar laughed. It was a real laugh, deep and full and genuinely amused. One ship was threatening 300 Vraxi warships. It was absurd. It was the most ridiculous thing he had ever heard. You are insane, he said. All ships destroy that vessel. 312 Vraxi warships opened fire simultaneously. The amount of energy that hit the Achilles in the next 4 seconds was enough to crack a small moon. Plasma beams, kinetic rounds, nuclear tick torpedoes, particle lances, Everything the Vraxi had, they threw at the single human ship in one massive coordinated volley. The space around the Achilles turned white with the fury of it. Sensor displays across the Cathari fleet overloaded and went dark. When the light faded, the Achilles was still there. It had not moved. It had not raised shields. It had not fired a single weapon in defense. It had simply taken the full firepower of 300 warships directly on its hull, and it was completely, absolutely untouched. Not a scratch, not a scorch mark, not a single plate of armor out of place. Nuri stared at her console. The readings made no sense. The hull material was something her sensors could not identify. It was not metal. It was not composite. It was something else entirely, something that absorbed energy the way a black hole absorbed light, completely and without effort. Silence spread across the corridor like a wave. Then Elara Ven's voice returned. Same tone, same warmth, same perfect calm, as if nothing at all had just happened. Your hour just became 5 minutes. On the bridge of the Fang of Raxus, Warlord Damagar stood very still. For the first time in his long and violent life, the universe had presented him with something that his philosophy of strength could not explain. He had hit this ship with everything he had, and it had not even noticed. But he was Vraxi. He was a warlord. And warlords did not retreat from a single enemy, no matter what that enemy could do. All ships, he said, and his voice was harder now, stripped of laughter. Second volley. Concentrate fire on the forward hull. Find a weakness. The second volley hit. The Achilles did not react. And then slowly, so slowly that at first no one was sure it was really happening, the human warship began to move. It turned toward the Vraxi fleet. Not fast, not in a rush. It moved the way a mountain would move if mountains could walk, with a heaviness and certainty that made speed irrelevant. Nuri watched her display with wide eyes. The Achilles was accelerating, but gently, almost casually, as if it had all the time in the world and knew it. It was heading directly for the center of the Vraxi formation, directly for the Fang of Raxus. "Sir," she whispered to Voss, "it is heading straight for them." Voss watched the display. He thought about what Archivist Palun had told him. About 40,000 colonists who had fought with mining equipment and bare hands. About 3 border systems burned clean in a week. About a message that said, "Next time, we will finish it." And now, 200 years later, a single human warship was sailing calmly into the teeth of 300 enemy guns. And it was doing so because 12,000 farmers on a colony no one had ever heard of had been murdered by a bully who thought no one was watching. Someone had been watching. Someone had come. "All Cathari vessels," Voss said quietly, his voice reaching every ship in his fleet. "Hold position. Do not fire. Do not move. Just watch." The Achilles moved forward into the Vraxi formation, and the universe held its breath. The first Vraxi ship died at 4 minutes and 58 seconds. That was not the right word. It did not die. It was taken apart. A beam of light, if it could even be called light, reached out from the Achilles and touched the destroyer on the left flank of the Vraxi formation. The beam did not burn through the hull or explode against the shields. It folded the space around the ship like a hand closing around a piece of paper. The destroyer crumpled inward, its hull bending and twisting as gravity itself turned against it. And in less than a second, it was a compressed ball of metal, half its original size, drifting dead in the void. Its escape pods launched cleanly before the compression reached the crew compartments. Every single one of them. Nuri saw this on her console and did not understand it. The weapon had crushed the ship but had left just enough time, exactly enough time, for the crew to escape. That was precision beyond anything she had ever imagined. That was a weapon designed not just to destroy, but to destroy exactly what it intended and nothing more. The second ship fell 3 seconds later, then the third, then 4 at once. The Achilles moved through the Vraxi formation like a creature from a nightmare, slow, deliberate, and completely unstoppable. It fired weapons that the Cathari sensors could not classify, beams that twisted space, projectiles that passed through shields as if the shields were not there at all, bursts of energy that reached out and simply turned off the power systems of entire ships, leaving them dark and drifting but structurally intact. And the point defense systems. Voss watched the data feed with a feeling that was beyond fear, beyond awe, somewhere in a territory of emotion that his species had no word for. The Achilles was shooting down Vraxi missiles before they were launched. Its targeting systems were tracking the weapons inside the Vraxi ships, calculating the launch trajectories, and destroying them in the tubes. It was not reacting to threats, it was predicting them. It was seeing the future and responding to it in the present. In the first 60 seconds, 27 Vraxi warships were disabled. In the second 60 seconds, 41 more. The Vraxi fired everything they had, every weapon, every torpedo, every desperate tactic in their arsenal. They tried ramming. They tried coordinated crossfire patterns designed to overwhelm any single target. They tried scattering, concentrating, flanking. Nothing worked. The Achilles moved through their fleet like a river moves through stones, flowing around everything, touching everything, and completely, impossibly indifferent to the obstacles in its path. By the 3-minute mark, 96 Vraxi warships were out of the fight, crippled, dark, and drifting. But their crews were alive. Escape pods filled the space between the disabled hulks, like seeds scattered from a dying flower. The Achilles had not hit a single escape pod, not one. Nuri was crying. She did not realize it at first. Cathari did not cry the way softer species did. There were no tears, but her carapace was vibrating at a frequency that meant grief or wonder or something between the two that she could not name. She was watching the most powerful display of military force in recorded history, and the thing that broke her was not the destruction. It was the mercy. Every shot was placed with surgical care. Every disabled ship was left with life support running. Every escape pod was tracked and protected by the Achilles' own point defense grid, shielded from debris and secondary explosions. The humans were dismantling the most powerful war fleet in the quadrant, and they were doing it while simultaneously making sure that as few people as possible actually died. They could have killed everyone. Every officer on every bridge in the corridor knew this with absolute certainty. The Achilles could have turned the entire Vraxi fleet into dust in seconds. It was choosing not to. Every crippled ship instead of a destroyed one, every functioning escape pod, every crew compartment left intact, each was a decision, made in the fraction of a second between one weapon firing and the next, to show mercy to an enemy that had shown none to the farmers of Tessran 4. At the 4-minute mark, 170 Vraxi ships were disabled. The rest were scattering, trying to run, their formations broken and their courage shattered. Some powered down their weapons and went dark voluntarily, hoping that surrender would be enough. It was. The Achilles did not fire on a single ship that stopped fighting. The moment a Vraxi vessel powered down its weapons, it became invisible to the human warship. It simply ceased to be a target. The precision of this was almost more terrifying than the weapons themselves. It meant the Achilles was not firing blindly. It was not caught in the heat of battle. Every single shot was a conscious, deliberate choice, and the choice could be changed in an instant. At 4 minutes and 30 seconds, the Fang of Vraxis was alone. Damagar's flagship sat in the middle of a field of crippled warships. Its escorts were gone. Its support ships were dark. Its fighter screens had been swept away like dust. The Fang of Raxus still had power, still had weapons, and Damagar was still standing on his bridge. But his fleet, his beautiful, terrible fleet, was finished. The Achilles stopped. It had been moving slowly through the entire engagement, and now it stopped. 200 meters from the Fang of Raxus. 200 meters, close enough for Damagar to look out his bridge viewport and see the human ship's hull with his own eyes. Close enough to read the name painted on its side in white letters. UNS Achilles. Ilara Ven's voice filled the corridor one more time. Warlord Damagar, 4 minutes and 32 seconds. That is how long it took one ship to break your fleet. I want you to understand something. I could have done it in 30 seconds. I chose to take longer because I wanted to give your crews time to reach their escape pods. I wanted them to live. I want you to remember that when you think about what happened here today. She paused. You have 30 seconds. Surrender the officers responsible for Tessran 4. All of them. Or I will board your ship and I will take them myself. And Warlord, I promise you, you do not want to see what human marines look like up close. Damagar stood at his viewport and looked at the Achilles. It filled his entire view. This close, he could see details, the layers of armor, the weapon ports, the subtle lines of engineering that spoke of a technology so far beyond his own that the gap was not measurable. He had spent his whole life believing that strength was the only truth in the universe. He had been right. He had simply been wrong about who was strong. Send them, he said to his officers. His voice was quiet and empty. Send them all. 12 Raxi officers were transferred to a shuttle within minutes. The men who had planned the Tessran 4 raid, who had given the orders, who had stood on the bridges of their ships and watched 12,000 civilians die. They were handed over without ceremony, without protest, and without honor. The Vraxi fleet powered down completely. 312 warships, the pride of the Dominion, sat dark and beaten in the void. On the bridge of the Vigilance of Own, no one spoke. No one moved. They had come to this corridor expecting to die in a hopeless last stand. Instead, they had watched a single ship do the impossible. Not just defeat an overwhelming enemy, but defeat it while refusing to become the thing it was fighting against. Then the Achilles hailed them. Ilara Ven's voice came through one more time, and this time there was something new in it. A warmth that went beyond calm, a gentleness that seemed almost impossible coming from the ship that had just reshaped the balance of power in the quadrant. Fleet Commander Voss, I believe you have a peace summit to conduct. My apologies for the interruption. We will remain in the area in case anyone else gets creative. Best of luck to you and Ambassador Tovik. The channel closed. Voss stood in the silence of his bridge and realized that his hands were shaking. Not from fear, from something else entirely. Something he had no word for. Something that lived in the space between terror and gratitude, between awe and the sudden, overwhelming urge to weep. Beside him, Nori wiped her console clean of the moisture from her vibrating carapace and whispered to no one in particular. They saved us. They saved everyone. And in the wreckage-strewn corridor, surrounded by the drifting hulks of a broken fleet, escape pods blinked their lights in the darkness. Every single one of them carrying a crew that was alive, because a species on the other side of the galaxy had decided that killing was easy, and mercy was the harder, braver thing to do. The shuttle from the Achilles was small, plain, and completely unremarkable. It docked at the neutral station with a soft click, and the airlock opened, and the first human that most of the people in the corridor had ever seen stepped through it and into the light. Lieutenant Commander Jai Marin was not what anyone expected. He was average height, brown eyes, dark hair cut short and slightly messy. He had a crooked smile that appeared on his face almost immediately, as if smiling were his natural resting state, and everything else required effort. He wore a simple navy uniform, with no medals, no ribbons, and no decorations, beyond a small patch on his shoulder that showed a blue planet circled by stars. He was carrying a box. "Hello," he said to the security team that met him at the airlock. "I am Lieutenant Commander Marin, diplomatic attaché from the Achilles. Captain Ven sends her regards and asked me to sit in on the summit as an observer, if that is acceptable." He lifted the box slightly. "I also brought pastries. They are a traditional human gesture of goodwill. I made them myself this morning. The ones with the brown tops are chocolate. I recommend those." The Cathari security officers looked at each other. They looked at the box. They looked at the small, soft, unarmored human standing in front of them, with his crooked smile and his homemade pastries, and they tried very hard to connect this person with the warship that had broken 300 Vraxi vessels less than 6 hours ago. They could not do it. It did not make sense. None of it made sense. The summit proceeded. It was, by every measure, a success. The Vraxi delegation, what remained of it, since Warlord Domagar had been relieved of his command by his own government before the day was out, agreed to full reparations for the attack on Tesrin IV. They agreed to a formal ceasefire. They agreed to the creation of a demilitarized zone along the Malvari border. They agreed to these things quickly and without argument, because the memory of what had happened in the corridor was fresh, and because the Achilles was still sitting outside the station like a patient guardian, and because nobody wanted to find out what would happen if they said no. Marin sat quietly through the entire summit. He took notes. He nodded politely. He offered pastries during breaks, and the pastries were, without exception, delicious. The chocolate ones were particularly good. Ambassador Tovik ate 4 of them, and later described the experience as one of the most positive diplomatic exchanges of his career. Several delegates approached Marin during the breaks, cautiously, the way one might approach a sleeping predator. They asked careful questions about humanity, about Earth, about the Achilles. Marin answered all of them with patience and warmth, and the kind of open honesty that made it impossible to dislike him. A Cathari trade minister asked him what Earth was like. Marin said it was a beautiful planet full of terrible weather, and that humans spent most of their history arguing with each other about things that seemed important at the time, but usually were not. He said this with a crooked smile, and the trade minister laughed, despite himself. A Vraxi junior officer, young and clearly shaken by the days of Etz, asked Marin if humans were always this powerful. Marin was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "We are not powerful. We are just very, very stubborn. We decided a long time ago what kind of species we wanted to be, and we have been too stubborn to become anything else." The junior officer did not seem comforted by this. On the second day of the summit, Ambassador Tovik found Marin alone on the station's observation deck, looking out at the stars. The Achilles was visible through the window, a dark shape against the distant light, enormous and silent. Tovik floated beside him. His bioluminescence was soft and steady, the color of calm curiosity. "May I ask you something, Lieutenant Commander?" "Of course." "Why?" Marin looked at him. "Why Tesrin IV? Why any of this? You have no treaty with the Molvari. You have no economic interest in this corridor. Tesrin IV was a small farming colony that most of our own people had never heard of. 12,000 dead. A tragedy, yes, but a small one by galactic standards. Why did your navy send a warship across the galaxy for 12,000 Molvari farmers?" Marin was quiet for a long time. He looked out at the stars, and when he finally spoke, his voice was different. Not sad exactly, something deeper than sad, something old. "Because we heard them screaming," he said, "and we were close enough to help." Tovik waited. He sensed there was more. "That is the whole reason," Marin said. "We do not need a treaty. to care about people dying. We do not need an economic interest or a strategic calculation. We heard what happened to Tessran 4, and we knew we had the ability to do something about it, and so we came. That is how we work. That is all there is to it. Is that a uniquely human trait? Tavik asked softly. Marin smiled. It was the crooked smile again, but there was a sadness in it that had not been there before. I hope not, he said. But our own history is full of times when people screamed for help and nobody came. We know what that feels like. The silence, the waiting, the realization that no one is coming and you are alone. We decided as a species that wherever we could reach, wherever we could hear the call, we would be the ones who came. Not because we are better than anyone else, because we remember what it is like when no one comes at all. Tovik said nothing. His body glowed with a light that meant something too complex for words. On the last day of the summit, Fleet Commander Voss requested a private meeting with Marin. They sat in a small conference room, alone, and Voss asked the question that had been eating at him since Palin's briefing. 200 years ago, the Confederacy tried to enslave a human colony. We killed 40,000 of your people, including 9,000 children. Your navy came back and burned 3 of our systems in response. His carapace was very still. Why would you now protect species that are aligned with us? Why would you help the Confederacy's allies? Marin looked to him steadily. You did a terrible thing, he said, and we made sure you understood the consequences. That was necessary. But we do not believe that species are defined by their worst moments. If we did, we would have to condemn ourselves first, because our own history is full of horrors that keep us awake at night. He leaned forward slightly. You changed, Fleet Commander. Your people abolished the expansion doctrine. You signed protection treaties with smaller species. You escort Mulvari refugee ships through dangerous space. You put your own soldiers at risk to protect people who cannot protect themselves. You grew, and that growth matters to us. It might matter more than anything. Voss was silent for a very long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. It was not enough. It was nowhere close to enough. But it was all he had. The next morning, the Achilles prepared to depart. Its engines powered up with a low hum that vibrated through the station walls, and every ship in the corridor, Kefari, Mulvari, and the remaining Vraxi, felt it in their bones. Before it left, the Achilles broadcast one final message. Not a warning, not a threat. An open transmission to every vessel in the corridor, spoken in Alara Ven's calm, warm voice. To all vessels in the Dralvan corridor, humanity stands with those who protect the helpless and welcome the stranger. If you are ever in need, you may call for us. We will come. This is Captain Alara Ven, United Nations Navy warship Achilles. Fair winds and following stars to you all. The Achilles jumped to hyperspace and vanished. One moment, it was there, filling the viewport like a mountain. The next moment, it was gone, leaving behind nothing but empty space and the fading echo of its drive signature. The corridor felt very large and very quiet and very safe. That night, long after her shift had ended, sensor analyst Nuri sat alone at her console on the bridge of the Vigilance of Own. The bridge was empty. The lights were dimmed. Outside the viewport, the stars burned cold and distant, and the corridor was peaceful in a way it had not been for years. She pulled up the automated warning that had started everything. The ancient alert from the Confederacy's deepest archives, the one that had flashed across every screen and changed the course of her life in a single moment. Priority Alpha, species designation, human, vessel class, warship, all Confederacy assets, prepare for the unthinkable. She read it one more time. She thought about the battle, if it could even be called a battle. She thought about the escape pods, every one of them untouched. She thought about Lieutenant Commander Marin, and his chocolate pastries, and his crooked smile, and the old sadness in his eyes, when he talked about the silence that comes when no one answers the call. She thought about a species that waged war like gods, and made peace like neighbors, that carried anger for generations, and forgiveness in the same hand, that crossed the galaxy for 12,000 farmers they had never met, because they heard the screaming, and could not bear to do nothing. She deleted the old warning. She sat for a moment, her hands resting on the console. Then she began to type. Revised advisory, species designation, human. If encountered, they are not your enemy. They are not a threat. They are the best friends you did not know you had. Prepare for the unthinkable. They will help you. She submitted it to Confederacy High Command for review, knowing it would probably be rejected, and not caring even a little bit. Then, she turned off her console, and she went to bed, and for the first time since she had left home for the stars, she did not feel small. The universe was very large, but somewhere out there, in the dark between the stars, a ship called the Achilles was sailing toward the next place where someone was screaming, and the next place after that, and the next place after that. And they would keep coming, for as long as there was suffering, and as long as they had the strength to answer, and as long as the stars still burned.